Bon dia a tothom i benvinguts a la segona edició de la Veu GovTech. Gràcies per acompanyar-nos a aquesta nova sessió. Per començar, dono la paraula a en Jaume Miralles, director general d'Intel·ligència Artificial, Eficiència i Dades de l'Administració de la Generalitat de Catalunya, que farà la benvinguda i presentarà la nostra convidada d'avui. Endavant, Jaume.
Gràcies. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a second edition of Veu GovTech, an initiative of the Catalan GovTech community launched within the framework of the GovTech Catalunya program to create permanent space for dialogue, collaboration, and inspiration. Veu GovTech was born with a clear purpose to connect Catalonia's public innovation ecosystems with leading international voices that are transforming the way technology can strengthen government actions and improve public services, while fostering the exchange of ideas, experiences, and best practices that help us accelerate public sector innovation. In this context, it's a pleasure to welcome Kelly Fox Ommundsen, an international leader in digital government, regulatory innovation, and the development of GovTech ecosystems. In her role of the World Economic Forum, Kelly has led global initiatives aimed at strengthening public institutions, advancing digital inclusion, and fostering new models of collaboration between governments, businesses, and international organizations. Her experience provides a valuable international perspective on how governments are navigating the opportunities and challenges of artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies. In Catalonia, digital transformation and collaborations with the GovTech ecosystems are key areas of work for the government. Today's conversation offers an opportunity to exchange perspectives, learn from international experiences, and reflect on how innovation can help build more effective public services. A central focus of today's sessions will be the recently published report, Making Agentic AI Work for Government, a readiness framework. The report provides a practical roadmap for governments seeking to adopt agentic AI responsibly and at scale. Rather than focusing only on the technology itself, it identifies the organizational capabilities that public administrations need to develop, including governance, leadership, data, talent, infrastructure, risk management, and public trust, to move isolated pilots and achieve sustainable high-impact implementation, which is something that we are also focused here in the Catalonia government. During our conversation, we will explore Kelly's experience at the World Economic Forum, her perspective on the evolution of the GovTech ecosystems in Catalonia, and the key insight from this new framework. We hope these discussions will help identify practical actions that government and GovTech companies can take to accelerate the responsible adoption of AI in the public sector. Kelly, thank you very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and we look forward to hearing your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaume. Thank you very much. And Kelly, once again, welcome. It's a real pleasure. And as Jaume mentioned, we're really looking forward to start hearing from you and from your experience. So let's start the conversation. Before we deep dive into more specific topics, I would like to start with getting to know a little bit more about your own journey and how did you get into GovTech and digital transformation, and if there was any specific experience that made you get into this world.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Javier, and thanks everyone for joining. Good morning from Geneva. As mentioned, my name is Kelly Ommundsen. I am American, as you might be able to tell from my accent, but am based in Switzerland. I've been with the World Economic Forum for the last 15 years, essentially, and working at the intersection of technology and governance. I've run a number of our different portfolios for many years. I helped to lead our US government relations in our New York office, then moving to headquarters. I served for many years as our chief of staff. I helped lead some of our digital work. I created the forum's presence in the metaverse when that was becoming the sort of new emerging technology. And for the last several years, I've led several portfolios on digital inclusion, GovTech, and my newest work on regulatory innovation. Maybe I'll hit on two things. One, what is exactly the World Economic Forum? And also, Javier, to your second question in terms of something that is sort of important on my personal journey. So first, on the World Economic Forum, I'm sure many of you have heard of it. Perhaps if you've heard of it, you might only be familiar with our annual meeting in Davos, which is our flagship global meeting. But it's really the tip of the iceberg, in fact, of what the forum does year round. And some people ask me, do you spend your whole year preparing for one big meeting? I would love to say that's all that we do, but in fact, at any one time, the forum is running around 200 plus initiatives. We have a essentially a large community of hundreds and thousands of members across different kinds of initiatives. We have over 1,000 partner companies, and we work very closely with governments, academics, NGOs, young leaders. And in fact, our mandate in the international architecture is to be the international organization for public-private collaboration. Now, today, public-private partnerships are something that is very much mainstream, but when we started nearly 60 years ago, in fact, this was quite revolutionary. And over time, we've really seen our mandate evolve from being able to surface idea to creating knowledge to driving impact. And we do that through our various initiatives and the ways in which we bring people together at events like Davos, but in virtual communities and sessions, in fact, like these all throughout the year. And what the World Economic Forum is trying to do is essentially to solve the world's hardest challenges. And we work on everything from aviation sustainability to gender equality to having more clean and safe metals and mining. We work on just about everything. And what I think is so powerful about that is not only the impact you can have in any one lane, but essentially where you're able to have the cross-section and the cross-pollination of the issues. So that's in a nutshell of what the forum does. In terms of my personal journey, that's an interesting question. I've worked on sort of a number of different technologies. I would say in terms of GovTech in particular, where I've been most inspired has been working with the government of Ukraine. The forum, or I just described in terms of what our sort of main institution does, we also actually have 23 affiliate centers around the world called our Centers for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And those take the global agenda that the forum works on and helps to bring it into a national or subnational context that's aligned with local priorities. And so we have a center in Kiev that was launched in 2024. And so we work very closely with Ukraine on their GovTech ecosystem. And I'm sure many of you might be familiar with their Super Dia app. What is incredible about the Ukrainians is they've had even before the war, a somewhat mature GovTech ecosystem. But once the war came into force, it really accelerated everything that they have done. So not only out of necessity, of course, because when you have millions of your citizens who are dispersed around the world, that you need to continue to have continuity of services and be able to continue to connect with them. But they've really also seen this as a personal mandate and a way of excellence to be able to accelerate what they do and double down. So now if you have the DIA app, which means action in Ukrainian, you have access to more than 130 digital documents. So you can have your fully digital driver's license, your fully digital passport, any kinds of permitting you need. On both between the app and the platform, they offer more than 200 government services. They're continuing to add on. Now they have their DIA AI and also their DIA education platform. And so not only are you able to do virtual learning, but you can understand if you have Ukrainian children who are based all over the world, you want to be able to have that continuity of Ukrainian language teaching. And so it's really powerful. Everything from doing your taxes to being able to get married online, which when the war started was very important because if you had a soldier on the front line, he couldn't necessarily make it into a government office that may or may not still be standing. You can register the birth of a child online, and also you can log the movements of Russian military equipment. So essentially empower all of your citizens to be able to act as your front line. So for me, that's been something that's been incredibly inspiring to be able to work together with them, not only at the pace in which they move, but also too, it feels like something where we're able to really help give back to a government in crisis. So that's been really powerful, and perhaps on a future fireside chat, we can help facilitate and bring on someone from Ukraine to be able to tell their story personally, because for me, that's been a big inspiration in the work that I do.
Thank you very much, Kelly. It's very interesting, and thank you for sharing also a bit more context about the World Economic Forum, because as you said, most of us know it for the Davos Forum, which was my case. So, but you did a lot more. And also when it comes to Ukraine, I think this is really impressive because despite the war, life goes on. So it's really nice that you can be helping also on this matters for the government. Also, that's something I would like to mention is that all of this career and everything you've done it at an early age, being a woman in a sector that it's not normally led by males. So this is an extra point for you, I would say.
No, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And when you and I were speaking, I joked that I couldn't believe that I've done all this in 15 years and I'm still 25. I'm not 25, but sometimes I feel like it. But it's been no, it's been wonderful. And also too, I think what's really incredible about the forum is that we have access to the world's top leadership. So when we are working on issues, we're working with ministers, we're working with mayors, we're working with CEOs and CTOs, and so really trying to pull the levers. And so while I think some of the criticism around the forum has been, okay, you have these great conversations in Davos and other places, but what does it lead to? And in fact, what we believe is that it can have a really powerful ecosystem impact, and that our strength is in partnering. So we're not the ones who are going to be on the front line actually making the change, but the idea is that we help to curate, the partnerships we help to build, the ideas hopefully that we are able to inspire is then able to trickle down to everyone in the ecosystem. And so like conversations like today might not necessarily lead to any direct action, but hopefully it starts to seed some ideas, and that, we can help connect you with those in our ecosystem who are working on similar challenges, or other governments who might be able to share their experience. And that's where some of the real impact is able to happen. So I think there is both the idea around what's the power of discourse, and also we really believe that that's how you're able to transform ecosystems, by bringing in new ideas, bringing in new connections, and hopefully able to then work across on a global scale, paired with on the local level, where actually you all in Catalonia are driving the real impact.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure it really does. And conversations like this inspire and help to ecosystem to know a bit more what's going on around the world. So yeah, definitely yes. I would like, actually, you mentioned Catalonia. I would like to bring now the conversation closer to us, to our ecosystem here in Catalonia, and specifically the GovTech initiative, because since we launched the program around in 2023, early 2024, we've been building this ecosystem, which is built by public administrations, startups, SMEs, and different agents within the innovative sector. One of our main objectives has been to foster public and private collaboration to accelerate the innovation in the public sector. So I think it would be very interesting if, based on your international experience, you can share or give some advice of what do you think are the key ingredients for creating a strong public and private collaboration, and on the both perspectives, on the government, but also on the companies that are seeking to work for the government, and what they could do to approach better to the public administration.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Javier. And I would just caveat and say that I am by no means the expert on Catalonia and on Spain in particular. I obviously work across a global lens, and so would very much defer to you all in terms of your experience on the ground. But what I can share on my experience working with various governments is, I think overall, if we look at various indices from the World Bank and OECD and others, that Spain overall is one of Europe's stronger digital governments. But what I've seen is that, in fact, some of the most interesting things are actually what's happening at the local level. And Catalonia is frequently cited as being a particularly vibrant GovTech ecosystem. I think that's very much due in part to the intentional ecosystem building, because we know governments can have wonderful plans and wonderful visions, but don't necessarily have the technical skills or the ability over time and the right kinds of resources or the right kinds of skill sets to be able to make that happen. And so therefore, having the right kinds of public-private partnerships are absolutely essential. And we really believe that for governments, that's the right kinds of key to success. And if we look at in terms of where overall you've been strong, a strong investment in terms of digital public services, digital identity, of course, being one of those foundational layers, really investing in connectivity and data infrastructure, and all these backbone layers, which are really critical in terms of being able to layer services on top. I mentioned the OECD, of course, in the recent 2026 report on all sort of 6 dimensions that they measure, that Spain overall has ranked above average. And without these core foundations that we just talked about, that in fact, in order to be able to build on AI, whether those are large language model or, which I know we're going to talk about in a little bit, agentic services, that these are absolutely core, and that you'll really struggle to be able to scale a lot of these things that are happening at the various regional and city level into a national level. So where I think you've been really strong is, in fact, having these intentional, building these communities, bringing in startups, bringing in the large tech players, things like challenge-driven innovation, as well, the importance of collaborating together with universities and research centers, because this can be sort of the seeds of where your next startups become. And also as sort of the ebb and flow of different startup cycle, if you're able to have the continuity with universities and with the broader education ecosystem, I think that's a really powerful lever. And then in terms of thinking about some of the ways in which you might think about being able to build on that strength in the future. So I think one of the issues in which we've seen is that while you have incredible ambition, incredible talent, what I think lacks is some of the connective tissue. So how are you actually then able to build the connections across the various regions? How are you able to then build on top of the pilots and scale them outside of one isolated pilot, either across regions or across departments or across use cases, that oftentimes you have a lot of incredible experiments, but essentially they end up sort of staying at the pilot phase. So you don't necessarily have the fully developed reuse mechanisms that you'd need in order to be able to continue to scale that. I would say another key challenge, and this is not unique, and one of sort of the knottiest issues is around having enhancements in the procurement system. That I know there are already some mechanisms to be able to have blended procurement where you're able to get smaller players into larger procurement, but that the default still goes to the larger integrators. And so that barrier point to entry can be slightly more difficult. So in terms of thinking about ways in which you might want to build on that strength over time, so procurement is one, increased focused on interoperabilities of standards so that you're able to then have that reuse from the pilots and across regions, and then being able to really focus on scale. So not just continue to do a series of great pilots, continue to make a series of great announcements, but from the beginning, design mechanisms that either you kill the pilot right away so that you're able to then focus on something that works, or from the beginning, it's then, if it doesn't hit a mark, designed to scale over time. So finding ways in which you're able to then continue to ensure that you don't have this, which is very common across almost all governments we work with, this continuative pilot ideas. But I would reiterate, you have a really strong starting base, strong digital government, strong startup ecosystem. Time and time again, Spain is heralded, and Catalonia in particular, in terms of incredible startups and incredible ideas, but just building on that connective tissue so that you're able then to really use that to leapfrog as we're looking into more advanced technical and frontier services, I think would be a way in which you could think about emphasizing and investing in the future.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kelly. That's a very important message. You mentioned a lot of things that I think they have to work, all of them combined, in order to get things smoothly into production and into new services for the citizens. And actually, you mentioned scaling. Scaling is also one of the priorities of the current government. We're trying to do kind of a methodology in what exactly what you mentioned, right? That before starting the pilot, we know what's going to be the path for production. So this is something we've taken into account, and it makes sense that you're mentioning as well. I would like to jump now because you talk about ecosystem, procurement, scaling, but all of this in a way, and more in the last few years, it's talking about AI, right? Because most of the companies in the ecosystem, they are using AI solutions, or at least they are introducing AI as part of their solutions. And I think this brings us to the report that previously Jaume mentioned, making agentic AI work for government, a readiness framework that you recently published in the World Economic Forum. So, of course, we're gonna give a careful read on it, but I would like for you to share the most important insights that this report gathers for our audience to take some notes.
Yeah, thank you. So with agentic AI, we have seen that we are, AI, of course, is a very hot topic, LLMs over the last few years, but in fact, we're about peak hype cycle when it comes to agentic AI, that everyone is very excited. You hear AI agents everywhere. And in fact, many governments who we speak to are both excited and don't actually know what that means or necessarily what they're trying to achieve with agenticizing their services. So I think this is both the enthusiasm, but a big knowledge gap in terms of, okay, what are we actually talking about? And importantly, where to start. And so what our report is trying to do is try to demystify a little bit in terms of how should governments be thinking about agentic AI, and then as well giving them concrete ways in which they can start applying it or start to build the kinds of frameworks that they'll need to put it in their governments tomorrow. So what the report does is in our research process, we wanted to come up with a standard way in which we're actually able to talk about what a government does. And interestingly, this isn't actually something that exists. So we had to create first a framework around what are the core services that any government does. So we mapped out hundreds of services and then condensed them down into a list of 70 core government functions mapped across 9 different categories. And here it's everything from document validation, issuing permits, benefit calculation, crisis coordination, payment processing. What is every government, if you're a city government, if you're a national government, what are the core things that you do? And then we took these 70 functions and then we mapped them on a graph against 2 axes. So the first around potential. So how suitable is something to be automated? What is the expected volume? Obviously, if something's higher volume, then you're going to have a greater impact. What is going to be the public impact in terms of how much this is going to benefit citizens if you actually are able to agenticize it? And then maps against the other side, which is the complexity. So thinking of things like data quality, what is the burden in terms of integration? Is it really complex data, or does it utilize a multitude of factors, which makes it more complex to be able to then easily compute? What are the ethical risks and concerns? Is it something where there is particularly sensitive data or sensitive kind of decisions that need to be made, or something that might require more human validation or perhaps human judgment? What is going to be the error consequences? And then, of course, also privacy constraints. So different kinds of data is treated differently. So essentially the potential and complexity. Then we scored these 70 functions. So thinking, maybe just taking a step back and giving some numbers. So aside from the excitement, why are we actually think that this made sense? So we have, or rather Salesforce has done a study around interest in utilizing agentic AI services, and they found that 90% of constituents that they surveyed were interested in utilizing AI agents in the public sector interactions. I think that speaks to a couple things. One, in terms of the potential for efficiency and ways in which, an always-on government that's able to deliver faster, more efficient, more effective services obviously is very appealing. I think maybe it also speaks to the fact that the state of public services and that there's such room for improvement, but really that the potential and the enthusiasm from the end user is there. We know that from another survey done by Capgemini that the institutions they surveyed, that 90% of those public institutions were planning either to explore or to deploy agentic AI over the next 2 to 3 years. Now, this survey was done with mostly governments from the global north countries, so I don't think it necessarily fully represents a global picture, but it directionally points to the fact that you have a lot of enthusiasm from the users, from the governments, but also we know from a survey done by Gartner that in fact 40% of those pilots that will be started will be canceled by 2027. So a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest, but in fact, a lot of things that are essentially going to fail. And so all this points to we need a framework that is actually going to help us to decide, okay, how do we start and how do we make it impactful? And this goes back to the pilot question around how do we actually design something that's going to scale from the beginning? How do we design for success? So going back to our 70 functions and our graph, what we did here is essentially then mapped it on how do you scale and how do you rate. And looking across those 70 functions, the headline there is in fact in the short to medium term, we found that about 50% of those government services are actually ripe to be agenticized in the next several years. And of course, this is something that also will evolve over time. So as you improve your data quality, as you start to run more pilots, as the technology evolves and becomes better, more effective, and more pervasive throughout government, that this map we know will change. This is a snapshot of where we are. But what that points to is that in fact, you have half of your government services, which you can already start exploring as opportunities of these could be your few killer use cases. Another important thing that I would mention about the report is when we're talking about what these core government functions are, that many of them, by definition, aren't siloed to one specific ministry. And this is really important because we're talking moving away from sort of department-based processes to things that are function-based processes. So what are all the different steps you need in order to complete a function? So I'll give you an example. So with document validation and processing, your first task, you need to receive the document. Second task, you need to verify their authenticity. Then you need to check their completeness. And then you need to extract the kind of information that you need. So this might hit multiple different departments over time. And you're looking at sort of an end-to-end process because ultimately you want the workflow. You don't necessarily care in terms of where it sits or, within whose purview. What I think makes this particularly exciting in terms of thinking about the document validation is this is something that all departments need to do. We all need to receive in different ways, shapes, or form, of course, the kinds of documents you receive, the kinds of information and input, what kinds of data it is and what you're going to do with it look differently. But if you build an agentic workflow that's able to do these 4 tasks, that this is an AI agent you could use in your Department of Housing, in your Department of Transportation, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So these are ways in which you're able to then connect these different tasks, and you could see the scale use cases which can be reused and applied over time. In terms of thinking about, what makes this also quite exciting is the fact that we know that essentially we're all having more and more budget constraints. We're all asked to be able to do more with less. We're all getting mandates and directorates from the top saying we need to start using AI, we need to start integrating more technology, we need to be more efficient. And this is a really tangible way in which we can actually say, okay, here's, all the things that our government does. Here are, 2 to 3 killer use cases where we could start building AI agents tomorrow that we would be able to then scale over time. And with that, it gives you the confidence to then start expanding that list. And that we know that once you have 1 or 2 agentic workflows that work, that is the opportunity for scale. One of the things I might caution is when I'm explaining, it says, oh, of course, it's so easy. We just think in functions, not in departments. We do know, in fact, it's really hard to break traditional, particular government hierarchies when you have strict structures, and oftentimes you don't always have the right kinds of protocols for the data to be able to talk to each other, or you have different regulations in terms of how data can move across different agencies. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen in the background in order to be able to lay the groundwork for that workflow to happen. But what's really powerful is that this is the way that a citizen needs a service. They don't necessarily care what's the internal sausage making and which department it hits. They need to renew their driver's license. They need to apply for a housing permit. They need to be able to apply for a passport. And if you're able to then connect in the back end with the data, with the workflows, and you're able to automate it so it's faster, quicker, more efficient, then you're really looking at the power and opportunity of being able to really expand that for citizen-centric services.
Thank you, Kelly. I think you mentioned a lot of things that are very important. It's really a framework, no? And it's actually kind of encouraging because when listening to you, I was thinking, okay, we're doing that, we're not doing that, we're doing that. So that's I wouldn't say most of the things, but that's some of the things that you mentioned that actually we're doing in Catalonia, which is good. I think also helps the fact that having a general direction specifically for AI, overlooking how AI is implemented, not in silos, but across all the organization. This is something important. I don't know if it's something you saw also in other governments. This is something they're doing to centralize the lead of AI in one single department across all the government.
Yes, I mean, we see different approaches in different governments. Some governments are starting to have chief AI officers where they're overseeing a high-level transformation. Other governments and I would say this is more often the case, and in fact, they're more siloed. So you have either a Ministry of Digital Transformation, which doesn't necessarily have supranational powers to be able to then impact, or you might have a really good CIO in the Department of Finance, or perhaps you have one. But what you're missing in a lot of governments I see is that you don't have necessarily the right kind of data registries or data backbone for the data to be able to talk to each other. You have different mandates and different budget lines that are coming across the different ministries rather than a whole of government approach. So oftentimes you see structurally some of the silos. One of the things I forgot to mention, the Ukrainian case, which made it quite powerful, is that their Minister of Digital Transformation, in fact, was a deputy prime minister. So he had the super authority across other ministries to then help to pull those levers. Another quite ambitious cases within the UAE. A few of you may seen earlier this spring that they have made a mandate that 50% of government services will need to be agenticized by 2030. So a hugely ambitious target. And really you had from the top leadership this policy mandate saying, this is where we want to move. Now we need to figure out actually how we need to make that happen. So every ministry has now begun to start doing workshop, start to mapping out their various flows. In parallel, they've been working on some of these data issues to be able to say, okay, here's our direction of travel, and we're moving our whole government in that sense. I would say they're more of the outlier. You see more of a siloed approach. But again, where you're able to really see that scale and power of impact is when you're able to work across departments, when you're able to then share the use cases that you start to build on. That's where the power really is. So that is, I would say, more of the gold standard. But the reality is that many more, that most, in fact, fall into a much more fragmented approach, which then essentially we're just seeing that, okay, we just want to layer AI on top of our existing ways of working. But particularly agentic flows don't work in that way. They work, across on a workflow, not on sort of, okay, we need to check this box and then it moves into this department and we check this box and then this person needs to validate it. So having a way in which everything's able to happen in a full automatic loop is as well where you see where things can be quite powerful. I might also, on that point in terms of human in the loop, I think that's something that is also one of these buzzwords that gets thrown in a lot when we talk about AI. And here, I think it's interesting. Human in the loop in the sense of you want to be able to have some auditability. You want to have someone to be able to check what's happening and be able to say, okay, this is correct, or you want to be able to have a way in which, okay, if an AI made a decision, that we're able then to ensure that we are able to then perhaps go back and reconsider that decision. However, we know that in fact, if designed correctly, and if you're able to then match that, the AI systems are going to have a much less error rate than human beings. And we sometimes like to feel more comfortable by having humans in the loop. And that can also be as part of the way you design your individual system, that perhaps you have more humans in the loop checking the various workflows in the beginning. And then perhaps over time, and also what we've seen from governments over time is that in fact, they either have the human in the loop less and less, or really not at all, only in cases in which someone wants to go and debate and say, okay, I don't agree with this decision, or I think there was something wrong. But in fact, having the fully closed loop of the agentic flow is where you really see the scale impact. And in fact, we see the better rates that things are correct, things are done efficiently, and things are done according to the standards and processes upon which they're designed.
Thank you, Kelly. So I actually would like to build on something that you just mentioned, because you mentioned human intervention, but human intervention in the design or validation of the content that AI is generating. But I would like to look at now from another perspective, because at some point this is going to go down to the user, final user, to the citizen. And I think there's also, AI has a lot of potential, but there's also the part of what risk can we accept in AI? And also, we have to make sure that the AI is trusted by citizens. So it's going to build trust on the government as well. So is there anything in this report that talks about this risk and how you can prevent it?
Yeah. So I think it's a great point. And obviously, anytime you're implementing any new technology, that you absolutely need to ensure that it is safe and that the benefits outweigh the risks. So that is 100% and absolutely the right kinds of questions to be asking. I would make a few comments. So I think when we talk about risk in new technology, there is the objective facts and there is the emotion behind it. Well, I think electric vehicles is a great example. We know that humans are terrible drivers, very poor, that they haven't slept very much last night. They just had a fight with their girlfriend. They're, putting on their makeup with the other hand. And in fact, that we know that, and we see from all of the data, the hundreds of millions of accidents that are caused by human error every year. And if in the US, for example, if we replaced every single vehicle on the road with an electric vehicle, we'd save 40,000 lives a year. And that's just in the US case. So if we were able to actually roll out electric vehicles everywhere, that we would see huge improvements in safety. And yet, if we look at where electric vehicles are being deployed, not electric vehicles, autonomous driving vehicles, autonomous driving vehicles around the world, then in fact, there are very few places in which they are permitted for largely regulatory, but essentially for risk and for safety reasons. And this is important because, one, you want to have the right sorts of regulatory landscape, but from a pure data perspective, that they're much safer than than human drivers. And yet we feel very differently if a robot injures or harms a human, which is an absolutely terrible, unfortunate thing to happen, than if a human does it. And so therefore our risk tolerance is different when it comes to allowing human drivers or allowing robot vehicles on the road, essentially. So one, we have to disaggregate where comes the emotion and where comes the actual data and the facts when it comes to risk. When it comes to the idea in terms of fallibility, that humans make error. Of course, AI systems and digital systems make errors, but at a much, much lower rate, essentially because you are putting in a process. And if you are then following the process, it repeats the process exactly the same way, hundreds of millions of times over and over and over again, which us as humans, we get tired. Your baby was crying last night. So all these different ways. So we also then need to factor in what kinds of risk tolerance are we able to then accept, and then put real data behind that. So in terms of, do we accept a 2% risk error? When we're talking about the human in the loop, what is our comfortable level and saying, okay, you need to check every 100 cases, every 1,000 cases, every single case. So where do you need to then scale that? And that's ultimately a policy decision that can be informed by the technical by the technical capabilities, but because there is this emotive human piece to it, we really need to understand that leadership needs to be comfortable with where you put that risk. But if we're looking at the number systems designed right are much better when they're done autonomously and through AI. We're not perfect. All of us know those who use ChatGPT and Anthropic and others, they do hallucinate. It is absolutely not perfect. But if you're running a sort of end-to-end rote workflow, that's not something where it needs to create something new, or then you can be quite sure in terms of that the process falls right. So I think that's really important in terms of how we actually then design the systems that both align with what are the technical specs and what can we expect the AI to do, and what sort of risk are we comfortable with. You also mentioned the piece in terms of citizens. I think this is an interesting choice. There are some governments who like to be very upfront in saying, we're integrating AI and, we're trying to be on the frontier. But we know that from a branding perspective, AI has a pretty negative brand at the moment, that most people have a negative view of the way AI, and that we can unpack that's for a lot of different reasons. And so then it's also a choice of how much do you share? And as I mentioned, some governments choose to share a lot. A lot of governments are integrating AI in the background, and it's not something they're necessarily promoting or talking about. Not because you want to hide it from the citizens, but because most citizens probably don't care what's actually happening on sort of the technical back end of the digital systems and the tech stack that you're building. And so what citizens care about is that they have better services, that when they have a problem, that they're able to then find a solution, that when they have trash on their street, that they're able to go into their app and report it and have somebody come and sweep the street. If there's a light out on their street, that they can be able to fix it. This is what they care about. And if AI is able to help us to do that faster and better and more effectively, then I think you'll really see the power for the citizen of what they're able to then see, rather than necessarily understanding, okay, perhaps it is an AI agent who is routing my different claim to this kind of department and alerting this kind of thing happening on the back end. So I would say there is risk tolerance, there's emotions, and there's ultimately, are we actually doing what we promise to do to our citizens in a better, more effective, more efficient, and accurate way.
Yeah, it's actually so true, because about the citizens, right? If you ask me as a citizen, what I want is things to get done quickly and not to bother me so much, and you add my information, so deal with it in a quick manner. On the other side, there's this balance of how much you share and you explain what you're doing. And also, I wanted to mention, when you said about the case of driving, it's also about perspective, right? And if you ask me, I would rate myself as a good driver. But if you ask my wife, she's not going to say the same. So of course, it comes to perspective as well and points of view. Let me go quickly through the chat, because this was not a session meant to have questions, but I think that's something that it's good to comment on. They are asking about the World Economic Forum, if you organize kind of matchmaking events where companies can go and present their solutions and connect with other governments, as such Ukraine, for instance.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So we don't necessarily design direct matchmaking in that way. What we do is more community events, like this one, where we host conversations and we allow both governments and those from the private sector to be able to share what they're doing, share common challenges, share problems. I would say there are maybe two specific things I can also mention. So within our GovTech platform, we do have a living use case library where we showcase best practices from either governments or public-private collaborations from around the world, where we're able to then feature case studies as a way to be able to showcase what has worked. We know the governments then use that for inspiration, and perhaps also then contact those who they were partnering with, where they say, okay, great, that worked in Catalonia. Maybe maybe this is also going to work in, Medellin or somewhere else. So we'd also have an open invitation, and this is open both in terms of accessing, but also submitting case studies for anyone. So if you have a great solution that you've been working on, we'd love to be able to feature that and profile that. In Ukraine, in specifically, if you're interested in working there, they do actually do a lot of matchmaking events. And in fact, on the 28th of July, they're going to be hosting a virtual webinar where they're essentially going to lay out their key government digital transformation priorities, where they're looking for partnerships, and they run open challenges where entrepreneurs from around the world can apply, and they essentially put you through then a startup accelerator program and help you to work with the Ukrainian government, because they want international startups who don't necessarily have experience or have the Ukrainian language to be able to work together with them. They put you through a boot camp, and then those who are finalists then get a fast track to government contracts. So if you're interested in working with Ukraine specifically, I'd be happy to share the context with Javier afterwards, and you're welcome to reach out and to join that later this month.
Great. That's very helpful, because companies, of course, they're always looking for new opportunities to connect and to show their solutions. So that's going to be helpful. They were asking also about the report, if you were sharing your screen. I don't think you did, but after the session, we want to share the report with all of you, so no worries for that.
Yeah, we have a report, but then we also developed a website. I'll pop that in the chat, where if you don't have time to read the full report, it's an interactive website where you can also interact with some of the data. So you can essentially get a snapshot in about 5 to 7 minutes of the key content of the report, which is also a bit more accessible as well.
Okay, great. Okay, Kelly, so we're getting into the last part of the conversation. I would like to ask you now, I think it's useful for the audience, 2 topics. One thing is if you can explain one use case or a success story, maybe something that has been implemented in other governments, something that we can mirror us and get some knowledge from. And also, I would like to ask you, from the perspective of World Economic Forum, what do you think are the most active ecosystems around the world that we should be looking at?
Okay, great questions. In terms of active ecosystems, I think that's an interesting question. We see it oftentimes happening more on either the national or the regional level. So I'm sure, as all of you are well familiar with Estonia, they're sort of one of the hallmark leaders when it comes to digital government services, and through that they've really fostered a lot of their local ecosystems, particularly local entrepreneurs, and have great ways in terms of fast procurement and government contracting. So I think there's one absolutely to look to. Another one, and I mentioned this for their ambition level, but we also work very closely with the UAE. They have an incredibly vibrant ecosystem that's really also been driven from the government, and they spend a lot of effort and time in terms of helping to curate and to bring the best startups from around the world into the UAE, and finding mechanisms as well to be able to have the right kinds of procurement and contracting to be able to work with the government. So those I would sort of make as hallmarks, as 2 quite vibrant. And then the third one, and again, this is no surprise that all 3 of these are places that rank at the top of the sort of GovTech lists, would be Singapore, and Singapore as well. A very interesting case, and I would also, so this connects in with your sort of GovTech use case. So within Singapore, they both partner with a number of different startups, entrepreneurs, larger tech companies, but they also build a lot in-house. And where I think is fascinating is that they have this blended model. We didn't talk about this today, but I know everywhere, and particularly in the EU, sovereignty is one of these key terms, and that you have both the benefits where you're seeing governments and across the EU a lot of investment in terms of national and regional ecosystems. But having that strategic optionality is also something that is essentially what sovereignty boils down to. Within the Singaporean GovTech ecosystem, they have different parts of their tech stack, which they partner together with the private sector, but then they also, on strategic layers, build themselves. This is either from a security or a sovereignty perspective, or from a cost-based perspective. And let me unpack that. So within the Singaporean government, I was speaking to one of the policymakers there and asking, how do you actually then afford to be able to build your own systems? How can you afford to be able to pay the kinds of competitive salaries that you attract someone to work from the government rather than going to work for Google or going to work for Meta or another company? And essentially what they said is that if you're able to then hire in the right kinds of engineers and you pay them appropriately, okay, so it might cost you several $100,000s a year to be able to get the top talent. But in fact, he mentioned several different programs to me. One of the ones he was talking about in healthcare, where he said, okay, we had 2 engineers. It cost us $300,000 a year to be able to pay those engineers. The program that they built have saved, this one little tiny, very niche program, saves the government between $2 and $6 million every year. So 300 investment, you're saving $4 million a year. So they said, yes, it's a big investment upfront, but in fact, that we're able to see the dividends of things that we're able to build bespokely. So what I think is really interesting is this blended model in terms of saying, some things we partner, some things we build in-house, but we're able to then match so that we have the sovereignty, the optionality, and that we're able to then have the right kinds of a blended layer where we feel both comfortable with the government that we're in control, but also that we know that we don't do everything ourselves and that it works much better when we're able to then partner in the right kinds of ways.
Yeah, and also very important to be able to keep your talent and also how you attract talent from outside. No? So this is also key to develop with initiatives. Okay, Kelly, we are about to close, so I would like to ask you just to finish if you would like to give some final remark or any message that you would like our audience to keep after this conversation.
No, I think it's been a really interesting and wide-ranging conversation. I appreciate the time and the interest. Also, too, just a congratulations to the Catalonia ecosystem. I think it's really incredible how forward-looking you are, how innovative that you're trying to be, and how intentional in terms of trying to bring in different outside voices that can help with inspiration. If we at the World Economic Forum can be helpful, then please do let us know. As I mentioned, we had our report in terms of where to start. We're now in the process of building out a second report that builds on that, of saying, okay, what is the enabling infrastructure that you actually need to be able to have agentic workflows in your government at scale? So we also welcome if you have any use cases or if you're actually working on and partnering together with on this, we'd love to learn from you and we're happy to bring you in as part of that research process and really to keep the conversation going. So just again, a big thank you and excited to as well see and follow your journey from here in Geneva. So appreciate it and look forward to building on this for hopefully a longer and deeper collaboration.
Very much appreciated, Kelly. Thank you so much. Definitely, we will keep an eye on what you do at the World Economic Forum, and we will follow you closely. Now we are connected, so we'll keep connected. I just want to thank you once again for your time, for sharing your experience with all of us. It's been a very nice conversation, I think. So thank you for that. And with your permission, I'm going to switch now quickly to Catalan to close the session and to say goodbye to our audience. Okay.
And thanks everyone for bearing with me in English.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bé, ja amb la conversa acabat, desitgem que la sessió d'avui hagi estat enriquidora per tots vosaltres, per tots els membres, que hagi resultat interessant i que ens enduguem tots plegats aprenentatges que puguem seguir aplicant en el nostre dia a dia i en el nostre ecosistema. Personalment confio que converses com aquesta ajuden a construir, no? I precisament amb ecosistema com vosaltres, i justament us volia agrair la vostra participació i el vostre interès, perquè al cap i a la fi les empreses i els membres d'aquest ecosistema sou els que feu que aquesta iniciativa avanci. Així que moltes gràcies a tothom per ser-hi i fins la propera. Que tingueu un bon dia. Kelly, thank you so much again. Have a lovely day. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.